All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started with this recipe. It's gonna be one that you're gonna realize, wow, I didn't realize how easy this was and how I could use Jamaica in another way. Like we typically just think about it as a tea, or I'm gonna go get some tacos somewhere and I get an agua de Jamaica. And I want to share that for the first round of boiling, you should totally keep that liquid and make an agua de Jamaica or a really nice cocktail. Like you can use the agua de Jamaica, add some when it's still hot, like you can add some star anise or a piece of cinnamon, some nice sugar or maple syrup, and you can add a little bit of citrus like orange juice, or I have passion fruit right now because passion fruit's in season, so you can really mix it up and make it something really nice and spike it with a little bit of mezcal or tequila or something like that. So that would make a really nice cocktail as well. Or you can just keep it simple and just make an agua de Jamaica, which is just as delicious. And so that I like to keep the first round of liquid for. The second round of liquid, you'll see that it's slightly more diluted and it doesn't feel, you can't feel the flavor of the Jamaica as strong as you could the first round, but you can keep it if you'd like. If the first round of Jamaica is really strong and you want to dilute it, you can dilute it with the second round of boiling liquid. Okay, so I am going to get into my ingredients, and I guess I should frame for, I think everybody knows that they registered for a Tacos de Jamaica class, so I don't have to mention that anymore. And I also like to mention, again, for folks who are new to the space, that I started doing this and I'm taking this recipe from my cookbook that just published a few months ago, La Vida Verde, because I wanted to create more plant-based recipes that made sense for our communities, recipes that my family would enjoy, where they wouldn't feel like, oh, I'm eating this like vegan food and I don't like it, but it could be all the nostalgic flavors that we enjoy. And so the flavors for the taco de Jamaica for me are pulling a little bit from this idea of finga, although it's not going to be exactly like finga, but it does call for that tomato, the chipotle, the onion, and the garlic, and all of that kind of gives that finga flavor to it. Although I will say that the Jamaica does have its own kind of star in a sense. But once you boil it down a second time and you really extract a lot of that acidity and the flavor profile that the Jamaica has, then you're left with the ingredients that's pretty neutral and that you can continue to cook down to soften it and to create a texture that's really nice in a taco and that doesn't shine out at you like I'm Jamaica and I'm super acidic and I'm taking over this dish. So I have here 3 cups of Jamaica leaves, and you can get this at your local Mexican food store, and I'm seeing it more and more at other stores too because people like hibiscus tea. And when you get it at a Mexican food store, you can typically buy it in a large bag, or sometimes they have it in the dry section, in the bulk section, although I don't believe that's happening right now. Any bulk items are being sold in that way right now. And so these leaves they're dried, they are fragrant, they smell acidic. And so the first thing that I want to do before I start boiling them is I want to give them a good rinse because there could be a little bit of dust or dirt on these leaves. So I want to give them a good rinse in a strainer. And I want to try to rinse out as much of that acidity as I can. So like that Jamaica strong flavor. And so this is 3 cups. And once I rinse this out, then I'm going to drop these into the pot of 4 cups of now boiling water that I have here, because I wanted to get that head start. So I have another camera set up at my sink where I'm just going to show you how I would rinse these off. It's nothing fancy, nothing super spectacular, but I'm just going to drop these into the strainer here that I have set up in my sink, and I'm just going to run a good amount of water in here until I start to feel, and you can already see below, possibly, let me tilt this, some of the liquid that's coming out has that red hue to it. And so I'm just trying to Just rinse off any potential dirt, dust. I can see here that there's like other elements, like some pieces of maybe grass or something. So I'm just gonna remove those and just cleaning it off. And I could smell how strong this is already. It's super, super strong. And so the more that you rinse, the more that you'll extract some of that flavor. So that's why I think that the first round of boiling, you'll get that nice Jamaica flavor. But since you're rinsing it so thoroughly, it's not going to be as strong for the second round. So you can see that the water here is really starting to take on that color of the Jamaica. Oh, and someone overboard. I'm going to get it all over and throw it back in here. And just clean my sink too. All right. And just removing any other random. Yeah, somebody is calling me. Okay, there we go. Somebody happens to be calling Solo Verde right now. Probably asking if we're open. All right. So I think that this is good to go. It has gotten a nice rinse. I'm going to rinse the bowl that it was in because I see a little bit of like residue in there to make sure that that's not any dirt or dust. And then I'm simply going to just drop my washed Jamaica, 3 cups of thoroughly washed Jamaica leaves into my bowl just so I can transfer it over to the pot that I have going on my stove. All right, I got as much of it as I could here. There we go. Give my hand a rinse. And this stains too. So if you haven't worked with the Jamaica before, beware. I'm wearing a white shirt. I'm not sure why I chose a white shirt today, but it does stain for sure. All right, so let me make sure that you can see my pot here. I'm gonna move my cutting board over. There we go. And I'm just going to remove the lid so you can see that I have some really hot water here. And I'm just gonna let this cook for about, I'll say 10 minutes because I already brought the water to a boil. If you're starting from cold water, give it about 15. This is 4 cups of water. And I just want to make sure that I try to bring it back to a boil and extract as much of that flavor from the Jamaica as possible. And for the second round of rinsing, I'm just gonna flip my strainer over. I'm off camera right now, but I'm just gonna get all those little bits that didn't make it into the pot right now out of my strainer. So I just flipped it over and I'm giving it a rinse. And for the next round of straining, I'm gonna bring it back to my strainer, but I'll have a bowl underneath that's gonna catch that liquid so that I can make an agua de Jamaica later. So all I'll do here, you can see all my Jamaica leaves in here. And all I'm gonna do is just grab a spoon, make sure that it's all submerged. Put the lid on a jar. And then I'll just leave this on like about a medium heat until it boils again. And so we'll stand by for that. It'll take a few minutes, but I'm gonna come back and prep my other ingredients while that's going. So let me move this out of the way so I can squeeze you back. What is going on here? There we go. Okay. So I'm gonna bring you to my cutting board. And I'm just gonna make sure all my other ingredients are ready to go. And I'm also gonna show you how to make a quick cashew crema. I know that that's there, it was there in the recipe as just like have cashew crema to garnish it, but I'll show you a really quick version. But before I do that, I'm gonna get started with a couple other ingredients. I have a whole globe tomato and 3 cloves of garlic. And this is super simple. All you have to do is quarter the tomato, grab your knife, cut it into quarters, just to give your blender an easier time breaking it down. And I'm going to drop that into my blender. I have here Vitamix, which is my blender of choice. And I like to put the tomatoes on the bottom just because it'll create some liquid and then it'll be easier for it to blend my garlic cloves rather than the garlic cloves first, because then they might get stuck underneath the blade. And you can remove the piece where the stem connects to the tomato if you want. I'm fine with it. It's gonna get all blended up. So I'll just toss that in here with my cloves of garlic. And I'm going to just give it a blitz until it's pretty smooth and set this aside. I still see a little piece in there of garlic. Okay, so just blend it until smooth. I'm gonna set this aside and I'll come back to it in a couple minutes. The other thing I'm gonna do is I have here a quarter of a red onion, and I'm just going to use my knife here. I already peeled the skin off, and all I'm simply gonna do is I'm going to create really thin slices. And this is gonna help give it obviously some flavor, but also will provide a little bit of texture to the dish. And this is typically, again, something that you see for tinga, right? The tomato, the onion, the garlic. And I'm just going to make sure that these pieces are all separated. And once our Jamaica is ready to be cooked, this is gonna really give it a nice flavor. So I'll just set this aside for now. And the other ingredient that I'll prep is a serrano. And serrano, if you're not super familiar with it, it's definitely spicier than a jalapeno. I think that this one's gonna be really spicy. I grew it in my garden and some of them have been pretty fiery. So we'll see right now what this one looks like. If it's super spicy, you can always remove the seeds. Doesn't smell too bad actually. So I'm gonna give it a little tiny taste. I like to get a little tiny piece and just give it a taste to see what I'm getting into here. And actually it's not bad at all. So I'm gonna leave the seeds in and I'm just going to create little slices, kind of odd shapes, just kind of curvy. This is gonna get minced up, so it doesn't have to be perfect slices because you're gonna run your knife through it. You're gonna mince it up. I'm turning the chile the other way and I'm bare clawing my hand that's holding the chile and I'm just running my knife through the chile to try to get little small pieces. And you wanna make sure that these are small because if your chile is spicy and the piece is too big, it's gonna overpower that bite that whoever, if you take a bite of that chile there in that moment, it's just going to completely take over the flavor profile. And all you want to do is just run your knife through to make sure that you're mincing it. And if you happen to have a serrano chile that was not spicy at all, which is pretty rare, like this one has like a tiny little hint of spiciness, but it's not overly spicy, you can always add a second one to it if you need to, if you really want to make sure that it has that nice kick. But remember that you're also adding a little bit of chipotle here. So the chipotle is going to bring a little bit of that heat too. So it really depends on how much heat you like in your food. All right. I think that's a pretty good mince, little tiny pieces here. They're almost gonna, I wouldn't say they're gonna melt into the mixture, but it's definitely gonna meld and start to really blend in and not be as stand out. All right, so there is my serrano chile. I'm gonna get rid of this and compost it. And then I already measured out here a couple of other ingredients. I have here 1 teaspoon of ground cumin. This is gonna give it a nice little smoky flavor, a little depth of flavor. And then I also have here 1 teaspoon of dried Mexican oregano. You can use Italian oregano if that's what you have on hand. And so these are kind of my go-to spices. Like my go-tos are definitely like cumin, oregano, mushroom powder. I have some mushroom umami stuff in the fridge, some veggie bouillon, the tomatoes, the garlic, the onion. Like those are pretty much the staples here at my home. And then I also have here 1/2 cup of oil, and I'm using a grapeseed oil, which is what I prefer to use for cooking here at home. It just has a higher smoke point, so you're not going to have an oil that starts to burn easily. Like all extra virgin olive oil has little particles in it, and it can't take as high of a heat point as other cooking oils. So I recommend like a vegetable oil, a grapeseed oil, rice bran oil, avocado oil, or you can use a regular olive oil, like not an extra virgin olive oil, but a regular olive oil works fine too. And then of course, I'll be seasoning with salt. You can add pepper if you'd like. I'm just adding salt to this particular recipe because it has so much other fiery standout ingredients. It doesn't really need the black pepper in my opinion. And so right now what I'm gonna do is, oh, and I wanna bring out the chipotle that I'm gonna be using and talk a little bit about it for a second. And of course I have it buried way in the back of my fridge, do I? I was like, Josh, don't forget to put your chipotle closer to the front. Where the heck is it? Oh, here it is. All right. So when you buy chipotles in adobo, they're usually in a small little 8-ounce container. Sometimes they're even smaller. And they usually are chipotle peppers in adobo, so that you have the whole chile and it's floating in the sauce. And the sauce for me is just as delicious as the pepper, right? They go hand in hand. And so this recipe will call for 1 to 2 tablespoons of chile and adobo sauce. And what I do is I open up the can and I blend it. So I blend the chiles and the adobo sauce all together. And then I have now this paste where I can pull tablespoons out rather than like taking a chile out one at a time and mincing them up. Like I've seen chefs do that. Like they'll pick out 2 chiles, 3 chiles, they'll mince them up on their cutting board and then they'll throw them in whatever it is that they're making. I just go ahead and blend the whole thing. And with Todo Verde, we buy much bigger containers of chipotle and adobo. You could also make this at home too. Like if you have dried chiles and want to add to it and rehydrate them, you could do that as well too. But I just go ahead and blend the whole thing. It's going to make your whole life a lot easier. So I have that on standby, ready to go. And I'm going to go ahead and say that my Jamaica leaves have boiled for at least 10 minutes now. And if you're starting again from cold water, it would be from about 15 minutes. And so you can see here that this has deepened in color and that the leaves look already like they're rehydrating. And so I'm going to bring you back over here to my sink. And all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this bowl underneath to catch the liquid. This is only if you want us to make the agua de Jamaica. If you're not gonna make it, you can just let the liquid go down the drain, but I do wanna keep it. And I'm going to carefully bring my Jamaica leaves and I'm gonna slowly pour that in so I don't splash around too much because again, this stains. I need to throw my leaves in there. I'm gonna see how I'm gonna grab that bowl right now and underneath because I'm sure it's hot. All right. And then I am going to I'm gonna put this pot back onto my stove with, I have another 4 cups of water already measured out. So I'm just gonna pour that water into here and start to get it working again. And I'm actually gonna give this a little rinse to get some of that Jamaica residue out. So I'm essentially, what you're seeing here is I'm like trying to get it to dilute as much as possible. I'm gonna carefully, I'm like trying to keep even these little leaves that are in the pot. Hold on one second, let me maneuver around right here. So let me lift this up, I'm gonna move this bowl, put this back, and then I'll dump this liquid out and get all the last little leaves that are in here. There we go. All right, I'm pouring my 4 cups of additional water into my pot, and I'm just covering it so that it can get hot again. And I'm gonna come back to my stove. Sorry, not to my stove, to my sink. And I'm gonna give these Jamaica leaves a really good rinse. You can use, if you have a spray, you can use that. And you can see just how much of a color is coming out on the bottom. And then I have here my bowl of hot agua de Jamaica liquid. So that's going to be for later. Okay. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of a squeeze against the strainer. Again, just trying to pull out as much of that color, as much of that flavor out of the leaves. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and put this back into my pot. So I'm going to grab my bowl. I have another bowl. Hopefully it's not too hot. I can grab it. Yeah, I can grab this with my hand. And I'm going to just put this into my bowl so that I can give it another round in the pot to boil again. So twice boiled Jamaica leaves. And so that second round of liquid, that's really up to you. Whether you want to keep it, you're going to see that it's not as colorful and potent. I mean, you could have caught a little bit more of the liquid that you were using to strain out or to rinse off the leaves right now, because that definitely still has a lot of color and flavor to it. All right, I think I got as much as I could get here. And I'm gonna take this over to my pot again. There we go. Remove the lid. And let me drop these right in. There we go. All right. There we go. So this is a good way also to just like avoid food waste. I mean, how many times have we made agua de Jamaica and then the leaves, I mean, hopefully they're being composted, but usually the leaves just end up becoming trash when they could become another element of food, another dish. All right, giving my hand a rinse. And I'm just gonna set this lid on a jar again. So just leaving a little gap open for it to breathe. And I'm gonna let that come to another boil for, again, now about 15 minutes. And so what I'm gonna do during that time is I'm gonna make a cashew cream that I'll show you. So let me grab those ingredients. Let me open up to that page. Move this aside.
Jocelyn, I have a quick question about your sink strainer. Where did you get it?
Ooh, I don't know. I think it might have been from, it might be from IKEA. I can't remember. But if you look for one that is like a sink strainer versus just a regular strainer or a sink colander, you should be able to find something pretty similar. It's just easier for me to keep it up above, kind of hanging onto the edges of the sink.
I just picked one up at Marshall's. That is,
Ooh.
and it was like $9, $9.99.
Yeah, yeah, and those are great.
Over the sink, and it works really good.
Yeah, yeah, I prefer it rather than the one that like sits in the sink, because sometimes when you're straining something, like the liquid doesn't go down fast enough, and so like it like you can have some liquid that's like still hanging out by your food. So I just prefer to have it lifted up so that it's not touching the sink at all. Okay, so I have another Vitamix blender because of course that's my jam. And I have here 5 ounces, so it's a little bit more than half a cup of raw cashew pieces that I'm using. And this is a quick cashew crema, because there's a couple different cashew cremas that I have in the book. One requires overnight fermentation or fermenting throughout the day if you make it early morning. And then adding some other ingredients like nutritional yeast and other things, probiotics. But this one's really quick and easy and still really tasty. So I have 5 ounces of raw cashew pieces. I like to use raw cashews versus toasted because the toasted obviously adds an additional flavor element, and that's not what I'm looking for this dish. I'm essentially trying to mask that there's any cashews in this dish at all. So if they're raw, then they're even more neutral in color. And then I like to buy the pieces because they're cheaper to buy than the fancy whole cashew pieces. Those are more expensive. So if you're going to end up blending this into a smooth cream, you don't need any whole pieces of cashews. And I just soak them for, I'm using a Vitamix, so if I soak them in warm water for like 30 minutes, it's fine. I'll get them to a nice enough texture with my Vitamix. If you're using a home blender that isn't as strong or a high, I forgot what the name of it is, like just a blender that blends like really well, then I recommend to soak them for at least a couple hours, or you can soak them up to overnight. And I'm just gonna dump this liquid out. This was just the liquid I used to just to soften them up and to soak them. And so I'm just gonna remove that liquid in my sink here. So I'm left with just the soaked cashew pieces. So I have that here, and I'm just gonna drop those into my blender. That's 5 ounces of soaked and drained cashew pieces. And then I have here a half a cup of just regular water. So this is what's gonna blend them until they're nice and smooth. I'm gonna add a good amount of salt, because any cream usually is tangy and slightly salty. I'm using here a flaky kosher salt. So if you have, I mean, the salt is really up to you, up to whatever you prefer of your salt levels, but just make sure that it has a good kick of salt, that it doesn't feel too bland. And this is part of what's masking that, the flavor of the cashews. So I'm just adding here a couple pinches, and then some lemon juice. So I'm going to squeeze a couple tablespoons of lemon juice. So I'm just gonna give this a slice down the middle. I'm actually gonna grab my lemon squeezer, and I'm going to just measure out a couple tablespoons. And this is what's gonna give it that nice tanginess. So let me just squeeze into this bowl here, over this bowl, I should say. And I will say that usually if you have a juicy lemon, a half of a lemon should be about a couple tablespoons of liquid. This one looks like it's not gonna, it might get there. Sometimes it catches on the top too. This one's a little dry. But usually you'll have 2 full tablespoons of liquid per half a lemon. Let me grab the other half here. Drop it in there. And if you have a store-bought lemon juice, you know, like I wouldn't say like the one that's sitting in the dry area of your grocery store, but the one that's like refrigerated, that it was like fresh juice, but they bottled it, that works too. So I have here my cashews, my water, my lemon juice, some salt, and I'm gonna just blend this until it's nice and smooth and creamy. All right, so quite a bit of blending, but it's worth it. You want to get all the little pieces and make sure that you got it super smooth. Let me make some space here on my cutting board.
Jocelyn, I have a quick question.
Yeah?
Why didn't you use the water that you soaked the cashews in? Did I miss that part?
I just strained that out because I didn't measure out that water. It's just enough water to cover the cashews and make sure that they're soaking. And also that water kind of takes out some of the like impurities that the cashews have. So I just start with fresh water.
Room temperature or cold?
I used, so for soaking, you can use room temperature or warm to hot water, depending on how fast you want them to rehydrate. So if you're in a pinch, use hot water. If you have some time, you can use room temperature water. You can pop them in the fridge and let that sit overnight. And then for the blending, I just use room temperature water.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So for me, I feel like this needs just a little bit more salt to get to the flavor profile that I wanted to. So I'm gonna give it just another pinch of salt, and then I'm gonna blend it one more time. And the other thing I'm checking for is if there's like any little bits of cashew pieces that didn't blend. I'm just trying to make sure I push them down, and that way you don't have any like little chunks of cashews in there. I'm gonna give this just another quick blend. Okay, so I have my cashew crema, which is hopefully, oh, and it started to get a little hot too. I'm gonna give it another little taste here. Much better. Definitely nice and tangy. It has that acidity from the lemon juice, a little salty. I'm gonna grab here a squeeze bottle that I have. I have these little tiny squeeze bottles here at home, just so that I can create sort of like a decorative approach with my cashew crema over the Jamaica tacos. And so I'm just gonna pour that into, and let's see how accurate I could get this in here. The opening is like so narrow. Got it. So you can see that it's nice and smooth, and it looks a little runny at first, but if you let this sit for a little while in the fridge, it thickens up slightly, so the cashews continue to absorb some of the water and the lemon juice, and it kind of thickens up. So I have my cashew crema ready to go. And I honestly, you know, you could put it in the fridge and let it get cold. I don't love it when the cream is too cold because you have the hot taco, and then if the cream is like right out of the fridge, for me it's just like it's too contrasty. So you know, I would put it in there until, like right now it's a little warm. You could put it in the fridge to let it kind of come down more to like room temp, but it's up to you. All right, and I think I saw a question come in. Is that?
We're talking about how great of a pourer you are.
Oh my goodness. That's taken years of
right now, is she gonna make it? Is she gonna make it? It looks so easy.
Yeah, it's just right now it's like nice and smooth and almost liquidy, so that was easy. But once it gets thicker, I've definitely done the whole like glop, goes right into it. It like misses the whole entry point here. Okay, so I have my second round of Jamaica that I'm gonna come back to. I'm gonna turn off the heat. It's boiling. I don't know if it's been 15 minutes. I'm just gonna go because I wanna make sure that we have enough time to get through this whole recipe. And you can see here that the liquid, let me move it, that this liquid is still really, really colorful, really deep in color. I'm gonna catch this liquid too. And you could always taste it too. You can give it a little taste. Even you can smell it. I can smell that it's definitely not as strong. It's a little diluted, but it's fine. So I'm actually gonna put my bowl that I had just removed back into the sink underneath my strainer. I'm gonna catch some of this liquid. Again, you don't have to do this, just that's an optional thing. And I'm going to drop my, let me bring you back over to my sink. There we go. You can see my dirty blender there. All right, and I'm going to carefully drop that into my strainer. I'm gonna remove that bowl now because that's a lot of Jamaica just for me. Maybe I could share with my mom. There we go. Okay, moving that over to the side. And I'm gonna drop the rest in here. I'm gonna grab as much as I can out of here. Although it's not great to put cold water in your hot pot. I just wanna make sure I catch all of that. And so now again, it's all about just trying to rinse and push out as much of the liquid, as much of this red hue, the flavor of the Jamaica. And I'm just using the back of my spoon to kind of push it down. It's just trying to make sure I'm squeezing out as much of the tea, essentially, the Jamaica tea out of here. And the water is coming out much lighter. It's almost completely clear. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for the water to be as clear as possible. And I think that's pretty good at this point. And I would recommend at this point, give it a taste just so you can see what the leaf tastes like after boiling a couple times. And there's some that'll have a little bit of a harder texture, some that'll be a little bit softer. And it should taste pretty neutral. If you were to eat this in the first round, I mean, you could compare that way. You could take a bite from a piece in the first round of boiling and then taste it again. And you'll see that it has definitely lost a lot of the flavor. All right, So I am going to let that hang out in the strainer as I start to prepare the other elements for this dish to bring it all together. So I'll just let that keep kind of draining as I come back to my stove. All right, let's go back over here. There we go. And I'm gonna move this pot now. Start piling up my dishes here. And I'm gonna use stainless steel saute pan. I'm gonna turn on to about a medium heat. And as that's coming to temperature, I'm going to grab my oil here. And I'm just gonna use a couple tablespoons to just coat the bottom of my pan with some oil. Hopefully my phone doesn't get overheated like it did yesterday. That was crazy. And so when the pan is still cold, you can see that the oil doesn't move fast through the pan. It moves pretty slowly, taking its time to move around. When it gets hot, it moves a lot faster. It also has this sort of like iridescent look to it. And I actually probably added just a little bit less of the oil. Let me add a couple drops more. There we go. And this is gonna be to start cooking our onion that we sliced up a little bit ago. And I'm gonna go ahead and drop the onion in. I don't need this to be super hot for the onion because essentially all I'm trying to do is I'm not really trying to brown it. I'm just trying to just get it to sort of this like soft texture. It's gonna become a little bit translucent. So I'm just gonna sweat the onions a little bit. And I'm gonna add, of course, a little pinch of salt because I wanna season my onions. And I'm gonna grab a spoon or a spatula. Grab my spatula. And this is on a medium-low heat. The temperature is coming up right now. And I don't need it to like sizzle and sear because then the onions start to brown too quickly. And I find that it's better for them to just kind of slowly cook and sweat. So if you've ever, you know, cooked something like an onion soup or something like that, or if you know, want to caramelize your onions, you know that you cook them low and slow. So it's not a matter of cooking them quickly. And I could hear a little bit of the sizzling happening. I just want to make sure that this doesn't get too out of control where I have like burnt onions or unevenly cooked onions. And so this just needs to cook for a few minutes. Let me come back to my recipe here. It just needs to cook for a few minutes. And then once I see that the onions have started to sort of become translucent and break down a little bit, where they're not as stiff, they start to become a little bit more soft. Then I'm going to add in my spices, which were my cumin and my oregano. And that's just gonna help bring out even more of the flavors. And also, you know, I don't want to add that too early in the process because then those things could burn. So spices could burn a lot easier than, you know, they're quicker to cook than the onions are. And I'm already starting to see, like you can see here, that they're starting to soften slightly. They're starting to become more pliable. I could almost start to fold some of the thinner pieces. And this is my bad here because I have some pieces that, like this one here that I'm touching, is pretty thick compared to some of these thinner slices. So they're gonna cook a little bit unevenly because I didn't cook them super symmetrical. It's fine. It'll all blend in, it'll be all good. Doesn't have to be super perfect. All right. I'm gonna give this just about another minute. And I'm also gonna turn on my back burner just so my comal can start to get warm for my tortillas. All right. Let's do another 30 seconds here. How exciting watching onions cook, everyone. Happy Sunday. All right, these are definitely starting to cook down. I can see that the color is starting to mellow out as well. So the, the purple or the red in it is definitely becoming less vibrant. And at this point, this is where I want to hit it with the spices. You have some soft onions here. You can cook these a bit longer if you want, really up to you. If you want your onions to become more caramelized, you could. I like a little bit of that crunch still in them. All right. So I have here my 1 teaspoon of cumin, 1 teaspoon of oregano. And I'm gonna go ahead and just drop that in here. And I wanna make sure that I'm mixing constantly here. I don't wanna burn my spices. And I'm gonna just cook this for about a minute, just because I want to bring out the flavors of those spices. And so that is becoming really fragrant, really, really fragrant, especially with the cumin in here. And I'm also making sure that my onions are evenly coated with the cumin. I'm gonna drop in more of my oil. And because it was starting to get a little dry in here, I want to make sure that I keep that moisture going. There we go. So look at how pliable these onions are now. Just this alone smells so good. All right, I'm gonna drop in now more of my ingredients. I'm gonna drop in my tomato and garlic mixture that I blended earlier. I'm just gonna grab my spatula, all right, to just scrape down my tamper and scrape down the blender. And so this is gonna create a little bit of a sizzle because it's liquid going into a hot oiled pan. Let me put this here. So I'll go ahead and drop that in. And so you have the raw onion and garlic, and that will cook a little bit. I'm gonna add in my chipotle right now. Just making sure that I like to scrape as much of the stuff out of the blender as possible. I think that's pretty good. All right. So I have my tomato and garlic mixture now in here. That is super fragrant, super yummy smelling. All right, and then I'm gonna drop in here, oh, I can't forget my serrano. Let me go ahead and toss in my minced serrano pepper or chile. One to 2 tablespoons of chipotle and adobo, up to you. I'm gonna go ahead and go for the 2. So I have 1 tablespoon. Let me get that second one. There we go. And then also a couple tablespoons of orange juice. Let me grab my measuring spoon again. So I'm just squeezing a piece of half of an orange here to get about a couple tablespoons of that juice. So pretty much you're creating like all these delicious flavors that are getting layered into your pan, and then we're going to drop in our Jamaica. I just want to make sure that I mix here so my chipotle is mixed into the sauce before I drop in my Jamaica leaves. And this is gonna flavor them so well. So now they have become this like nice texture. And they have a little bit of flavor, but they're pretty neutral. And so this is gonna really coat them in a nice, delicious flavor. All right, let me grab my Jamaica. Just pressing it against the strainer one last time, trying to get as much of that liquid out. All right, and I'm gonna bring them over. And I'm just going to drop all the leaves right in. And technically they're not leaves, they're flower petals. So I'll drop all the flower petals right in there.
Jocelyn, I was gonna ask if you give them one more chop before you put them in, but they look like they shrunk pretty much, right? That you don't even have to chop.
Yeah, I mean, it's really up to, you know, depends on what. I've had somewhere it's like the whole leaf. These were kind of already broken down. So it really depends on how big your pieces look. Mine were almost like the small separated leaves. So I don't think it's necessary for me to chop them. But if you did have one where sometimes it's like the whole flower, you could give those a chop if you want to try to just break it down a little bit. Look at that so far.
And then the mixture before, it kind of looked like a chunky sofrito kind of thing, right?
Exactly, yeah. And it kind of like a liquidy sofrito or something like that, right? And so essentially that's exactly what you're doing. Like you're building up all these flavors, and you know, it's kind of liquidy and chunky because you want it to really coat all these the leaves. You know, if it's not enough liquid, it starts to kind of you know, dry out. And I actually still have quite a bit of oil. I'm going to add a little bit more of the oil because I want this to pan fry a little bit. And you can add more as needed. So you have the whole half a cup that we started off with. You'll see that it'll start to evaporate slightly. And you'll need a little bit of more of the oil as you continue cooking. One more thing I haven't added more of is salt. I added salt to the onions, but I haven't salted since then. So let me add a little bit of salt here and I'll give it a taste. And you want to let this cook for a good like 20, 25, 30 minutes on just like a medium heat. And it'll allow the flavors to come together, to meld together, because, you know, just like anything that you make, soup, stew, saute, it takes a while for the ingredients to be like, oh, hey, what's up? Let's hang out. And then they start to kind of really sing together versus feeling like separate pieces of the equation here. All right, I'm gonna taste this for salt. And I have this again on like a medium heat. But that looks super yummy so far. Let me grab a spoon or a fork, whatever you have on hand, and give it a taste. That is really yummy. It needs a little bit more salt. The onions still feel a little strong. The garlic still feels a little strong because remember, all that was raw. So this cook time is gonna let those flavors sort of mellow out, the ones that are really strong. This looks so yummy, everyone. It smells so good. Any other questions coming up so far? This is gonna take a few more minutes to cook, and then I'll start working on warming up some tortillas. All right. And this is also an opportunity for you to adjust anything. If you're like, wow, I want to feel more of the chipotle flavor in here, I can taste it. Like right now for me, the chipotle is like a piece of it. It's not standing out. But if you really love that smokiness of the chipotle flavor, you can add a bit more. You can
I really
definitely
like
adjust.
the idea of how you blended the chipotle with the adobo, because a lot of the times I'm trying to scrape whatever adobo is left and I'm stuck with these chipotles and I try to chop them up and it's just, but I love the idea, just blend it and store it and have it ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was like the greatest idea. I'm like, right, why shouldn't I do that? Because I'm stuck with so much. I mean, I love chipotles, but they're whole and I really just want the adobo, but
yeah, yeah. And you know, when they're blended together, you get like the best of both worlds, right? And then also it just saves you the mess, because when you chop up the chiles, you're making a big mess on your cutting board. And if you already have it blended, all you have to do is scoop it out with the tablespoon or with the measuring spoon, you know? I added a little bit more salt to this. And I almost want to add a little bit more chipotle, but I'm letting things kind of come together a little bit. Sometimes I start to get a little like, oh my gosh, it needs more of this or that. And sometimes it just needs salt. Like it's not salted enough. And so it feels bland, but it's because it doesn't have enough salt. So make sure that you give it a nice amount of salt, and then you can adjust a little bit more as needed. It still needs a little bit more salt, believe it or not. I feel like I've added a ton of salt to this so far, but it still needs a little bit more. I can show you real quick. Just gonna break down an avocado. Move this over here. I just have a small avocado because I just really love the, you know, play on textures, and also avocado. I have a tattoo of one. That's how much I love avocado. And so all I'm gonna do is just use my knife to cut it down the middle, being really careful not to cut yourself. I have a perfect little avocado here. I'm gonna scoop out half of it, and I'm gonna make some really thin little slices that are gonna be perfect for garnishing. And so I just like this this texture on the tacos. I mean, it's a pop of color because as you're seeing, the Jamaica is like pretty dark in color. And so the cashew cream and the avocado give it like a nice splash of color, because again, like we eat with our eyes as much as we eat with our mouth. And so you want everything that you eat to be like really beautiful, and it'll make the dish be so much better. So that is ready to go. I can bring you over to my stove as we finish up the cooking process here. Again, I have my comal that is preheating. It's not quite hot. Getting there. I'll bring a tortilla to that in a moment, and we'll build up a taco. So I'm not gonna let this cook like the full, you know, 20, 30 minutes or so. But wow, that is looking just great. And as you cook this down, the Jamaica leaves will also continue to soften. They're absorbing some of this liquid. They'll break down a little bit more.
Jocelyn, is this one of the dishes that people are surprised to hear isn't meat?
I mean, this one maybe not so much, because the color is like so distinctly not any color that a meat would look like. But I think that people are just shocked because it's Jamaica, you know, because they know what Jamaica is if they've ever been to like a taqueria before, you know. And they're just like, wow, I never thought I could use this in this way. So it's more interesting than it is like, oh, I thought that was meat, you know. That's what I've heard more on my end. Let me give this another taste.
I'm even thinking this could be a really good filling in place of other things like rajas, or, you know, the squash blossoms, you know, like like a gordita or like a quesadilla.
Totally. And you
This would
know,
be
this,
so awesome.
yeah, this texture reminds me of the flor de calabaza, the squash blossom texture. It's very similar, you know, so it has like a very distinct texture to it. And that's why, like, you know, cooking it down for like the 20 minutes, I'm like going into 30-minute mode, but yeah, 15-20 minutes to allow this to kind of cook down. It'll help to break it down. Um, but yeah, very similar to that texture, and you can use it for so much.
Mm-hmm.
And just remember that the only thing to keep in mind here is like the color will stain, which could be really cool and interesting for whatever you end up, you know, using it to stuff. But it will definitely stain whatever you put it on. All right, we're getting close here. I'm gonna turn up the heat slightly. I wanna make sure this gets nice and cooked through. And let me start to warm up a tortilla now at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So the tortillas that I like to use are a brand here in Los Angeles called Colonel Truth. They're an organic tortilleria. They make masa, they sell nixtamal, mostly to wholesale vendors. So like with Vida Verde, we only use their tortillas and masa and nixtamal. Well, nixtamal, we also use another like heritage seed farm that we worked with called Native Seeds. But their tortillas are like no other, like yellow corn, organic, American grown. And it's literally just corn, water, trace of lime. That's all that's in here. Whereas, you know, other tortillas, like the Guerrero ones that I grew up on, have so many other ingredients that will just create more of like a sour tortilla, one that will have a higher shelf life. Like these don't last as long. So I buy a 60-pack of tortillas, and then I take out only the ones that I'm going to use for a few days, and I freeze the rest just so that I can make sure that they last. And so I really recommend their tortillas. If you're in Los Angeles, they sell them at Grassroots Market in South Pass. They sell them at Sarah's Market in City Terrace and Cookbook Market in Echo Park and Highland Park.
What was the name of the place?
They sell them at, it's called Colonel Truth is the tortillas. Colonel Truth Organic.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay, so I'm just making one for now. Let that get nice and hot.
Jocelyn, I just mentioned there's these really good tortillas from Northgate. They're made with hatch chili. Have you tried those?
Oh, I haven't tried those yet. I have to give those a try.
they're
wow.
And people thought, well, at least I thought they were cactus, the nopal.
Uh-huh.
But then they were really spicy. So they ended up, I guess the mixture has hatch chili in them.
That's so cool. That sounds so good.
Really
yeah,
yummy.
and it's really easy to do something like that too. Like if you wanted to fire roast some poblano peppers, for example, over an open flame, let them get really nice and charred. You can remove the charred skin if you want, or keep it. I like keeping the skin unless you're doing chiles rellenos. And then you can blend that with some water, some hot water, and use that liquid to mix it with masarina. And there you have some poblano spice tortillas.
That good.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I have a tortilla that is ready to go here. Let me grab my little plate. So I'm gonna grab my tortilla here. It's nice and pliable and cooked through. I didn't end up using all my oil, which is fine. I feel like it's liquidy enough. It doesn't really need the oil. So if you end up with extra oil, you can use it for something else later. I've used different variety of Jamaica, and sometimes it needs more liquid. These actually kept the liquid pretty well. So I'm gonna go ahead and layer on my Jamaica here. I still have like a stem. I'm gonna throw that out. All right, so I have a nice amount of my Jamaica leaves here. Let me lower the temperature. And then I'm going to bring it back over so I can keep adding to this. I'm going to add my avocado. So I'm gonna grab a couple of the center slices here. You can do one slice as photographed in the book, or you can fan a couple slices if they're a little bit smaller. So I'm placing those in there. And then you can squeeze over some of this cashew cream. And then just for color and contrast, you can get a little bit of like, this is just Chile California powder, and just sprinkle it over the top. Just so it like kind of ties it all together. You can add cilantro leaves to it. It's really up to you, but I just like trying to like make it as fun and playful and colorful as possible. So there is our taco de Jamaica. Yum. I'm gonna, yeah, you can add one slice of avocado if you want. If the avocado is like big, the one that I have is really little. So you can add a couple different, you know, a couple slices. But the one in the book, you can see here, the avocado is actually pretty large. And so I only added one slice per taco. All right, now the moment of truth. I'm gonna give this a bite. It's so hot.
I don't know. Watch me. We're all looking at you with jealousy right now. We're like,
oh my goodness.
Looks amazing.
It's so good. The flavor is so good. It definitely has that kind of tinga flavor, and the texture is like kind of like that flor de calabaza. I don't know why my eyes are watering. I'm tears of joy. I'm not sure.
That's all the chipotle love right there.
Yeah, totally. Totally. This is super yummy.